Hey everyone, welcome to LogRocket. Today I'm here with Sam Scott, who's the co-founder and CTO at Oso. Is that how you pronounce it? Oso, is that that's bear
Exactly, yeah.
in
Spanish for
Spanish?
bear,
Yeah,
exactly.
awesome. I remember from my sixth grade Spanish class the animal unit, so that came to mind. And I guess your logo is a bear, so I probably should have known that as well.
Exactly.
Excited to learn about what you're building. Can you give us a quick overview to what is Oso?
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's kind of good to be here. So, I mean, basically, the goal of OSA is to reduce the time developers spend on building authorization in their applications. And so I think, most people interact with these features, as users, as the way that you assign different permissions inside an application, the things that you're allowed to interact with, maybe think about something like Google Docs where you can, maybe share different files with people. You can give them different levels of access, like, viewer, editor, commenter, things like that. And basically, this is work that pretty much every single development team in the planet is just doing themselves from scratch, normally spending, doing 3, 4, 5 different iterations, spending anywhere from like a few months to multiple years to, ongoing. And basically the goal of OSA is to reduce that time so people aren't spending time on authorization and instead get to focus on their core app.
Got it. And so we've spoken on the podcast before to a bunch of companies kind of attacking auth from different directions. We've spoken with Stitch, and I think we spoke to Auth0. We spoke to Clerk.dev. So we've spoken to a bunch of those. How does Oso compare to those types of companies and products?
Great question. Auth, as it's like kind of often all lumped together, it's a ginormous space covering, everything from, there's like authentication and authorization, two big separate concepts. But also, there is multiple different places where you even care about doing authentication authorization, right? There is, building it into your product, your app, if you're on a product team, building it into your app. And then there's, the pieces you interact with in AWS to get access to your infrastructure. There is, things that happen inside internal corporate. So it's a giant space. There's, multiple different companies attacking different parts of this. And I think, historically, I think a lot of people have been focused on the authentication side of things. This is more around basically, logging into applications, identity. It's, everything from, signing in with username and passwords, doing multi-factor authentication, integrating with single sign-on solutions, when you can, log in with your Google account, stuff like that. All of that kind of thing is covered in the authentication side of the world. So when you think about something like an Okta or an Auth0, that is kind of typically their wheelhouse: user's identity, user management, logins. There are some, I think, authentication as a space is still relatively new, I would say. So you do see new startups coming along like Clerk, who I think they're, one thing I love about them is they are taking a very developer-centric view of the world. Like, how do we make this as easy as possible for developers to use, to integrate with their apps, to produce a really great product experience. And so there's, a lot going on in that area. Authorization is, I think, in many ways an even younger space. There aren't really any, existing, dominant vendors who've been around for a while doing this. We could maybe talk about why that is later, but, ultimately, authorization is, now that you know who somebody is, you've logged them in, you've authenticated them, I know that I'm, Sam or whatever that is, deciding what the person is allowed to do. So that's the core of authorizations. Like, now I know who you are. What can you do inside the application? Can you see this document? Are you allowed to edit on it? Can you, are you allowed to create such and such a thing? Can you invite other users to it? All of those questions about what are you allowed to do inside the app.
Got it. So basically that distinction between authentication, which is like figuring out who the person is, how do they securely log in, but then once you know who they are, what can they do? What can they view? What can they edit? All those kind of things. So like prior to Oso existing, would you say like the majority of companies just build their own system from scratch, or were there other tools on the market or frameworks or products that help there?
Yeah, I would say it's largely do it yourself. I think every most web frameworks, their ecosystems will have packages that exist in the space to kind of roll something yourself inside the app. I think the Rails ecosystem, for example, obviously Rails been around a long time, has a very, very healthy ecosystem. So there's some packages there called things like can, or the successor can, or Pundit, for example, which are packages explicitly for Rails that can sort of help you build something inside your Rails app for authorization. But I think those tend to be, for the record, I think those are both like great packages, for example, but they tend to focus, I'd say, more on the simpler side of the use cases. They still require you to do quite a lot of work yourself on top of it. And there's sort of not many just like out of the box, everything included packages that would just handle everything.
Got it. And so what does it look like to use Oso? So when you get started, how does it integrate? What types of apps does it integrate with? And then kind of walk me through how it works.
Yeah, so we have like a cloud offering called Oso Cloud. It's basically your typical SaaS product that gives you a couple of things. There's an API for configuring your authorization logic, which you do through writing authorization policies. It's where you describe who can do what. You have simple APIs for basically managing your authorization data. So if I want to create, I want to add teams to my product, then the kind of things I need to do, I need to have the data modeling for teams, I need to have the authorization logic, I need to build out the APIs to assign users to teams, and so on and so on. All of that you get through Oso Cloud. So basically the kind of workflow for doing that is you write your policy logic to say I want teams, and we already have a baked in data model that can just handle that kind of thing for you. So all you really need to do is just like add a couple of lines to your app to say to call the APIs to say, add such and such to a team, or, when I want to check, can someone do something? It's just going to use that extra data model of teams to make that decision. So really it's just a case of configure it with policies, integrate the APIs, you're sort of good to go, add any new authorization features you need.
And this is maybe a naive question, but why is Oso a SaaS product versus like, typically this would just live in code as, rules in your backend that determine when for a given resource what users can and can't do. You'd have teams in your database. Like, why build this as a separate SaaS product that interfaces with your application via API?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we actually didn't start out with the cloud product. So we actually started with the Oso library, which is a fully open source product, and it's a library that you just integrate to your application. Basically what we found is that the Oso library is pretty good for sort of monolithic use cases. So again, thinking back to that, you have a single Rails app, or you have maybe a single Python, Django application, something like that. The Oso library there is actually a really nice fit just to integrate into your application, to kind of like add, don't add any extra infrastructure or kind of dependencies on third parties, and you're sort of ready to go. You get kind of mostly the same experience as the cloud product. You still get to write authorization logic as policies, but it kind of integrates with your local data. So what we found though is that I think more and more we see a lot of people are operating in microservice environments, or bare minimum multiple service oriented kind of architectures. We found that a lot of people were even using the library product, they were investing a lot of time into kind of the data modeling piece, like figuring out the right schemas. Coming back to that Teams example, it's like you want to add Teams to your app, you need to figure out, okay, what's the data model look like? Like what, do I do my database migration? How do I think about that? How do I integrate with these kinds of things? And so basically through that experience of the Oso library, we found that there was more we could basically do for our users if we just gave them a kind of set of APIs, both in terms of doing less thinking about the data modeling, much easier for us to make this, highly performant and scalable, stuff like that. And then for people in those multiple service or microservice architectures, this was just becoming work that they were themselves doing otherwise. Like everyone we were speaking to was like building authorization microservices with Oso library already, and we just, felt we could save them that work.
And tell me a bit more about how you actually define your policies. Is it configuration as like, do you write code, or is it a YAML or JSON, or is it a GUI? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so we actually developed the Polar language, which is it's a policy language for writing authorization logic. It sort of has its roots in logic-based programming. So we're sort of inspired by things like Prolog and Datalog, and more recently something called Minicanron, as ways that we'd allow people to express authorization logic. And this was, this has been forever kind of like a really interesting part of the development process for us, which is that, authorization logic, it's so inherently like conditionally Boolean logic, lots of branching logic. It's like you can see a document if you belong to a group and the group has a membership of the folder that the file is in. And there's like all these like if this, then this, otherwise this, that, all that branching logic just means that having sort of a declarative logic-based language is this really nice paradigm fit for it. And so that's kind of at the center of Oso policies is this Polar language. Got some incredibly strong, like powerful primitives for building logic. And basically, though, what we've done on top of that, because we don't want people to have to become experts in the language to be able to write stuff, we sort of provide these kind of building blocks on top of it. So, for things like, if you just want to add groups to your application, you want to add something like teams, we want it just to be a case of you say, like, give me teams. And then we say, sure, like, here you go. And so you kind of get that, like, you have the power under the hood, but we give you this sort of like high level abstractions.
Got it. And did you, when you decided to go with the DSL approach, like creating this new language Polar, was it just that you didn't see a way to do it using existing tools? Like you mentioned some of those languages like Prolog, or even, doing it more in like a declarative language a popular declarative language. You just didn't think it would be as clean as crafting DSL.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, funnily enough, the 0.01 of Polar was actually just a Python library itself. Like it was pure Python, and we just exposed APIs for it. But we found that the things you had to do just didn't even look like Python anymore. You're constructing these weird objects, and it was effectively a DSL in itself. So that was kind of like pushed us towards a DSL approach. I think we did look at, should we just use an existing Prolog implementation? I think one of the things that Prolog, one of the things I find really interesting about Prolog is it's conceptually very different to how we think about normal programming languages, in that it actually has kind of very simple, kind of the core logic of it is quite simple. And in some ways, the power of it is that it's just like a conceptually simple model that is really good for building DSLs, rather than it being like, the language itself is something that you really want to necessarily just like use as is. It's in some ways, it's kind of built to be good for building DSLs. And so, when we were just looking at the kinds of things we wanted to do, to have, one of the things we were keen on having was sort of a static type system, authorization very centric around like what data am I protecting? I'm protecting a document. We wanted to have like a type system be a core part of it. We knew that it'd be important to integrate with application data. Like all of these aspects just meant that it made sense for us to build a language that could just like semantically have those as core concepts, rather than it be something that was kind of like artificially tacked on like after the fact. And so it's kind of the mix of those two things. It's like, Prolog itself is well suited to building your own thing on top of it. And then, we had specific things we wanted to have in the language.
And you bring up a good point there about like how application data is central to writing your policies. And, you can imagine like if you have your kind of typical enterprise SaaS role-based access control, there might be different parts of your application that different users have different roles and they can do different things. And like you need to have that state from your application database as inputs to your rules. So how does that work? Like, since everything is interfacing through API, you kind of just send over in your API requests the data that would be relevant, and then the rule processes that? Like, is that the right way to think about it?
This maybe part of it. So for Oso Cloud, actually, the focus is on us being your authorization service. Like if you were to build this yourself, what is all the functionalities you expect it to do? And so when I talk about, when you think about things like, role-based access, or, assigning users to groups and accessing based on that, sharing things with people, all of that data is like managed by the Oso service, because that is kind of its core responsibility, is to give you that functionality. So like a lot of that core data, a lot of that authorization data that will live in Oso Cloud. So when it needs to make an authorization decision, it uses that. But like oftentimes, the piece that you said is true. The scenario you described is also useful for when you have external inputs coming in. Like a very common use case is someone wants to bring, their Google groups with them, right? So this would be the customers of our users. So you're building your product. You want someone to be able to gain access to projects based on the Google group they belong to. So that will come from your identity provider, and you'll kind of like send that along with the request to Oso. And then we can maybe like, translate that to your domain specific logic. Like, oh, okay, so yeah, this group becomes this role and this role can do these things.
I see. But Oso also has its own data store that stores state on your users and various permission levels, or what
Exactly.
team they're on, or what are they, an admin or a regular person, like those kind of
Yeah,
roles.
precisely. Because, for a lot of the authorization data, and this is like one of the really interesting challenges of it, is it's like fundamentally that kind of has to be shared across all your microservices. You have a document service and you have a project service or whatever it is. Both of those need to know what role the user has. And so you end up in this situation where it's like, well, do you synchronize the data everywhere? Typically you'd put it in a service. And we want to be that service, that place that you can put it and, interact with it.
In terms of the policies and configuration of Oso, what does it look like in terms of testing that, and then also version control for the policies?
Yeah, so today we basically recommend that people take kind of a GitOps style approach to their policy management. It is just code, have it in a Git repo, have your sort of CI/CD workflows around that. I think in the future there's possibility that we'd do sort of more policy management, but personally I'm kind of a fan of everything that comes with the GitOps workflow. Is kind of all the tools that we already know exist around it. And then basically the kinds of things that we do inside Oso Cloud to make it, easy to build those workflows. We make it very easy for you to sort of create new environments based on, staging environments, or even, per branch testing environments. You can kind of easily fork your existing authorization logic, deploy a new policy, test it out, and then when you're ready, sort of merge it to, maybe to the main branch into production. If for people familiar with PlanetScale, for example, I think they're doing something very similar with databases. I think it's a really awesome model. The idea that, you can sort of fork your database very easily, create a branch, deploy a schema change, and then like when it's tested and ready, it kind of gets merged into production. There's a lot of great stuff there that we're sort of kind of cribbing some notes off of.
So I imagine, given the type of product you're building and space you're building in, you've probably had to think a little more in depth about security than the average, SaaS startup. Not that the average SaaS startup doesn't care about security, but just as a core infrastructure provider that deals with access, authorization, et cetera. So can you tell us a bit about, your overall security posture and any learnings that you've had as you've kind of thought through your security and compliance program?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of it starts with the team. So I myself, for example, I have a PhD in cryptography. Not that that's necessarily directly relevant to securing SaaS products, but I come from that security world, like sort of deeply steeped in a lot of that. We have actually a few members on the team who've run, say, product security at other teams. Like Intercom, for example, so they've like had that experience of securing SaaS infrastructure. And so kind of where that's led us to is, I think the great thing with security these days is there's quite a lot of like low hanging fruit things you can do that really aren't that hard, but massively increase your security profile. So for example, requiring multi-factor on all the core products we use. We actually somewhat recently, earlier this year, for example, we made it so that no one just has like basic password access to AWS. We're doing it all like federated through our G Suite accounts, and so all the user access is configured through that. We don't give people just like full root access to our production instances. A lot of the stuff kind of comes from internally, so we sort of make sure like we ourselves have sort of minimal access to everything we're running. So that's kind of like where we are today, is just like doing the kinds of things that you might do once you start having a full-on security team, maybe a Series B kind of company kind of thing you might do. We've had people who've seen this story before. they see that there's stuff you can do like today for quick wins, and we're just trying to do as many of them as we can.
So I'm curious to learn a bit more about what the long-term future looks like for Oso. So maybe you could start with the next year or so and then touch a bit on long-term vision.
Yeah. So I think the next year you're going to see a lot of stuff coming out from us very quickly. So, Oso Cloud, I mentioned a few times, we're still relatively early on. So, today, for example, we're in a private beta. So you can go to the Oso website, you can try out the cloud product. We have a sort of a sandbox that you can try out. But, if you, for users, going to production with it, we sort of do that in a more of a, hands-on way. We work with people, understand their requirements. So Oso Cloud pretty early. There's like a lot of stuff I'm really excited for us to be doing on that over the next year. So just kind of touch on a few of those. I think we spoke around a little bit earlier about this sort of the policy logic and the sort of how much coding you need to do versus like how much features you can kind of just drop in. So one of the things I'm excited about, we sort of have internally like a sort of a laundry list of 20 sort of common use cases and patterns that we see people need in authorization. Everything from roles to group-based access to approval flows to usage quotas, everything like this. Our goal over the next few months is just to kind of like steadily pick them off and have, first of all, like docs so that you can just go, oh, cool, that's all I need. But also some kind of like more interactive like UI features where you can just like through the kind of cloud dashboard just be like, give me groups. You kind of hit a button and your app now just like has that feature. So I think that one's gonna be. I think that's going to be like really exciting and give people the ability to just sort of, go in, add a few new features, see what the policy impact would look like and stuff like that. So I think that'd be a good one. And I think from there, like, a lot of this is just going to be about giving people the confidence that kind of the authorization is just working and there's nothing left for them to do. So like today, we have things like, request logs. You can kind of see the things that have been going through the service, but we want to be able to give people like kind of more and more insight into, maybe here are the parts of your policy that are currently being used. Maybe here are parts that aren't, like, suggesting possible ways you can, clean up and refactor your policy. You have maybe you built a feature, you added some logic, but no one's been using it in months. So it suggests that maybe you can remove that from your policy. And I think like what all this does, it just kind of gives you this, as I said, this kind of like peace of mind that your authorization is kind of just there. It's working. It's doing everything it needs you to. And sort of we're the ones kind of like on a day-to-day basis thinking about like, is everything working like it should? So I think that's kind of a big piece. So that's kind of a good chunk of it. I think the other side of things, again, our goal sort of internally, our company goal is sort of that, Oso is successful when developers are spending about 1/10 of the time on authorization. Today, we're starting with the modeling piece, everything you need to do through the authorization logic and the data models. But I think what we're going to do more and more of is what we think of as the enforcement side. It's, having good integrations in, API gateways. Maybe for all microservices, you just kind of have a single place to integrate. It's, having integrations for, frameworks like Ruby on Rails or maybe something like Express, so that when it comes to the case of like adding authorization to your app, that becomes a matter of a couple of lines of code and maybe a few minutes. All of this just in service of like reducing the time people spend on authorization. So that's kind of some of the some of the pieces that I'm excited about over the next year. I think in the like longer term, there's, I kind of mentioned this very briefly at the beginning, in the auth space, there's authentication, authorization, but then there's also multiple different places where you would think about doing authorization. And so I would just love to see people using Oso across like all forms of different authorization. So you need access to infrastructure, that it becomes super easy just to integrate, Oso there, that maybe even, I know one request we hear a lot, this maybe in the future roadmap, is, if people could use Oso instead of say AWS IAM, which historically has always been kind of hard to use. And, for a little bit of fun, one day I did do like a little Polar to IAM converter thing. So you could write Polar policies and get IAM policies out. We would love to just be that kind of like lingua franca everywhere for authorization logic. And, Yeah, and then sort of finally in the even longer term, something I'm kind of personally excited about because it was related to research I did in my PhD. So one of the projects I worked on there was doing sort of formal protocol analysis of TLS, how we scale the internet, and we use that to successfully find some pretty big vulnerabilities in like the TLS 1.3 drafts and things like that. So I've kind of seen the real world power of that. It's something, doing that kind of formal verification, it's something that has been used at pretty great success at AWS. They have a thing called Zelkova for analyzing if a S3 bucket is public. So yeah, in the kind of like the longer term, you could even imagine us providing, not just that kind of like declarative policy, but even, rigorous proofs around like what is and isn't possible inside your policy, making sure that, there cannot be any single logical bug inside of it and things like that. It's a pretty broad set of things that we could potentially get to cover. Just kind of ground things again, though, where we are today again is like really focusing on helping application developers spending less time with that inside their apps. And so I think again, more of this kind of shorter term things I think we'll work on is, if you need to implement an approval flow system into your app, making sure that we can give you all the tools to make that happen as quickly as possible.
Well, Sam, thanks so much for joining us. It's been great learning about Oso. For anyone who wants to check it out, it's just osohq.com. So you can go to the website, and any other resources that you'd recommend if people want to learn.
I think you'll find all the best links are linked from there.
Great. Well, thanks again, Sam.
Thanks very much for having me.